Hi everybody, thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for attending our April exhibition opening and panel discussion. So before we commence, I'd just like to acknowledge the Darug and Gundungurra people who are the traditional custodians of this land. And I'd also like to pay respect to elders both past and present. Now KSCA, or the Kandos School of Cultural Adaptation, was formed in 2016 by a group of artists, writers and activists, most of whom are here on this panel, to pursue the idea of art as an activity that brings about cultural change. So much of KSCA's work revolves around the post-industrial town of Kandos, which you may or may not be familiar with, about an hour and a half northwest of here, close in the Blue Mountains, in Wiradjuri country. But its members, they come from a diversity of places, and its projects bridge regional, rural and urban Australia. So this month's Window Gallery and Atelier of Lyttleton Stores Cooperative exhibitors are founding members of KSCA, and in particular are involved in the projects An Artist, a Farmer and a Scientist Walk into a Bar and the Hemp Initiative. So every exhibitor's works engage with and or encourage challenging and or changing relationships with the land, which is the most pertinent kind of cultural change. So discussing this exhibition and KSCA's projects and take-home concepts with us tonight are our 7, I believe, panelists. 1, 2, 3, yep. So we've got a foundational figure in Australian conceptual and socially engaged art, Milliss. Raise your hand. Fantastic. So we've got Cementa Contemporary Arts Festival co-founder Alex Wisser over here. We've got coordinator of An Artist, a Farmer and a Scientist Walk into a Bar, Laura Fisher, on the end. And we've got participating artists of An Artist, a Farmer and a Scientist Walk into a Bar, Georgie Pollard, and Jono, Bolitho, and Imogen, Semmler. And lastly, we've got the Hemp Initiative artist, Gilbert Grace, right next to me. Fantastic. So let's get this panel going. So Ian, I have a question for you first. I was wanting you to just tell us all about how KSCA was conceived and how its projects have come about.
Oh, that's easy.
Big one.
About 3 hours. Well, no, look, basically they came out of my very annoyed frustration with 10 years of living in Lithgow, really. I mean, it wouldn't have happened if Anne Finnegan and Alex and Georgie hadn't started Cementa and then discovered that I was living in Wiradjuri and invited me to be in it. But for the preceding 10 years or so, I've been living in Wiradjuri, where I'd spent part of my childhood, so I'd made the mistake of going back to where I came from, which is really a mistake. And then I spent years. Well, the reason I did it was because I thought if you're going to argue that climate change, remediate, like any sort of action is needed, you've got to actually go and face the people whose lives are actually going to be ruined by that, rather than helped. You know, like the people who actually are going to pay the direct price of you fixing up climate change. And that means coal miners and people in those living in those sort of areas. And so I went there, and because I came from there, I knew how to handle them, and I didn't get a particularly bad time in lots of ways. But after years of being on, I was almost immediately put on various council committees, like the Environment Committee and the Economic Development Committee and all of this, probably because I could finish my sentences most of the time. and I was on there with coal company people and stuff like that. And during that whole time, I never even managed to get the words climate change into a single council document, ever. In 10 years of fighting, the words never appeared. After dozens of public consultation meetings after various things, after helping write the whole economic development plan for the area, nowhere in there was there an acknowledgement that there was a thing called climate change and that the town would eventually lose its entire economic basis, which was coal mining. And that is now happening, you know, and Lithgow's been in real trouble in the last few years. But when around the time that the first Cementa came along, was about the time we were thinking of leaving because there'd been changes in the council and I couldn't do much anymore. And, my wife needed to move close to her work in Sydney. So when this came up, all my frustration about this 10 years sort of welled up in a very particular form, which is where I produced a fantasy Kandos, which was sort of like what I would have proposed for Lithgow. And so I was like, okay, you want to transition your town into something else. These are the things you should be looking at. How do you adaptively reuse industrial sites? How do you actually turn it into a renewable energy hub? How do you do a whole range of things? And how do you also generate street life and street activity and social activity, right? And so all of those things are there in that poster, in this fantasy Kandos, which we then put in all the tourist things in Kandos streaming. People tried to sign up to go on tours to see all the stuff. And got really furious when they couldn't. And then other people who lived in the town complained, put in formal complaints to the council. It's all wrong, because I even invented a different history for Kandos, which was slightly wrong, compared to the actual one that actually happened. And so slowly, but nonetheless, it basically was a thing like, hey, I'm an artist, I provide ideas, and so this is a way of just throwing an idea into the thing. And that provided that framework, which then would have just gone nowhere, it would have just been a poster, except for Gilbert. And Gilbert actually looked at it and said, well, actually, why don't we make some of this happen, And so Gilbert and Alex, started working on making some of it happen. And as these things do, it started out just being a thing about producing a plywood bicycle, but it spread out into totally reconstructing the whole world, really, which is sort of where we're at now. We don't just do agricultural stuff, We're talking about a whole range of other stuff. We're now branching out into talking about architecture, bike infrastructure, like urban infrastructure, things like that. So it just is one of those things. Sometimes a very little thing you do can trigger off something, and other times it just goes nowhere. But you just do them and throw them out.
It's wonderful. Art as a springboard for change. So, on the topic of you, Gilbert, tell us what you did with that envisioned Kandos, and also in the process, tell us about the Hemp Initiative.
Alex and I started talking about how to actually implement Ian's ideas, and Alex wanted to do a land-based residency. I, of course, was interested in bikes and various other forms of infrastructure and whatnot. We discussed it for a while, and he had a property in mind that we could actually start working on, and so I started mining the actual property itself for inspiration. And I was working on a hemp and bamboo bike at the time. It seemed like growing hemp was risky and very out there, and that would provide the ideal basis for us to continue.
It was only recently legalised, wasn't it, in terms of being able to buy
Yes
hemp?
and no. It had been legal for many, many years. Joseph Banks brought hemp to Australia in the form of seeds for the first governors to actually distribute amongst the farmers, to actually grow hemp to provide the British Admiralty with the sailing cloth and all the rest of it. So, okay, so that's where it's at the moment. Trying to get hemp back into the public sphere, undemonise it, get it so it's just normalised, a bit like bike riding. Bike riding has been demonised over the past. So I'm just trying to normalise bike riding, normalising the use of hemp. I use hemp in my paintings, which you can see spread around the walls.
Behind us.
The offcuts I'm using to make paper, which is also out the front. There's a hemp workshop, paper making workshop next week.
Yeah, wonderful. And the Hemp Initiative?
The Hemp Initiative, we teamed up eventually with a farmer, Stuart Andrews, who was the son of Peter Andrews, so you might know Peter Andrews from natural sequence farming fame. Stuart bought, basically he was forced off Peter's property, which he had bought, and by KEPCO, they had promised him a long stay, and then they reneged on that and basically forced him off. With
Do
the
people
money,
know what KEPCO is? Sorry, maybe.
Yeah.
Just as a
KEPCO is a Korean energy company. So they
it's a coal mine.
they're not a coal mining company, they're an energy company. So they were buying the supply of coal
from the valley.
but also the water that goes with it. So the water rights are very important. water is the new oil amongst the cognoscenti of the investing world. So they bought the water rights as well. Stuart bought 2 properties, one Marloo at Mount Marsden and the other one up in Queensland, which is now running as a successful forage venture. So he's running free-range pigs, foraging pigs, and foraging chickens. And, yeah, and he's doing great things with that. It's a beautiful example of how to actually turn the clock back a bit and take that stumble forward into the future.
So you'd arranged to work with him to grow hemp, to trial the hemp. Is that right, Croc? Tell that little adventure. That was great.
There was a few other steps involved in the meantime. So Alex had arranged, he teed up a few farmers. The first farm fell through. That wasn't surprising. People do get a bit jittery, overwhelmed about the prospect of growing hemp, going through all of the surveillance and all of the necessary DPI constrictive legislation and everything else. At this stage, it wasn't legal to grow hemp for food or to process hemp for food. It was legal to grow hemp for other things such as fibre. You had to supply a end manufacturer or and we had employed Clara Mazicki, who is the current president of the Industrial Hemp Association, to be our consultant on this project. So we had the right people involved, we had the farmer involved, he was cooperative, we had the inspiration, and we were following the guidelines, but they still wouldn't let us grow that first crop of hemp.
I think because you actually mentioned that it was an art project on the application.
Yes.
Yeah. So there you go. It was like after that we're like, okay, well let's just do this again. Okay, we just do that. We won't.
You probably need to explain to how it got even to hemp, because it went from plywood bicycle to, well, actually we can get bamboo bicycles, so let's do bamboo bicycle. Actually, bamboo bicycles are held together with a hemp rope. so actually, let's try growing hemp. So there's sort of like chain of ideas, which end up. This is a classic of you set out to drain the swamp and you end up fighting crocodiles. Top story.
The upshot is that another farmer took on the challenge and has now got a crop of hemp in the ground. It's seed hemp. So it's going for the oil for the seed, and apparently it's not doing too well. But she didn't expect it to go well the first time. It was an exploratory seeding of hemp, so there's the potential for her to grow further crops in the future, and just depending on how the political and other situations go. I'm also talking to somebody else from the other side who knows the processor of hemp up in the Hunter Valley, so we might be able to arrange further site inspections of the processing works, further workshops. I'm hoping that we can actually all get up to Shepherd's Ground, where there's an intentional community that is actually building a whole lot of hemp buildings for the people who have bought into that cooperative situation. And they're encouraging people to actually come and have a look at the place, and it's not too far out of travelling distance, so it could be a really exciting venture. And the beautiful thing about hempcrete, which is the building product, is that it's hugely fire resistant, resists termites. It's got all of these beneficial health properties with things like plasterboard and brick don't have it. It's 1/6 the weight of concrete, so you can actually build a hempcrete wall on a pavilion style structure and get all the benefits of thermal mass and insulation, and it's beautiful to look at. It breathes. So I mean, hemp has so many beneficial properties. It's just absolutely absurd that we're not doing more with it right now.
And it can be reconstituted.
Reconstituted and it biodegrades. Okay, so it'll go straight onto the ground as fertiliser for alkaline-loving plants.
So I have another little dimension to this project as well. So we actually, the hemp project was part of a larger project. They included Futurelands 2, which I don't know, which was one of the, really the first major sort of endeavor that KSCA put on. And that was funded by an Australia Council grant. And we, part of that was that we told them we would grow a crop of hemp as an artwork for that. And then basically we got hit by the drought. And so there was no crop the first year. And we were like, no, we'll do it the second year, it'll be fine. And we've done it the second year. And we've gotten, I think, a 10% strike rate. So we've got no hard work. And they're still sitting there waiting for the whole thing. And we're like, oh, yeah. So we're going to have a little bit of an issue with our acquittal on this one. Which is, I mean, for me, then the work that Gilbert's done is the work anyways. Like, it's, the fact is that the work, as far as I'm concerned, has been done, because the amount of education and passion that Gilbert brings to this, and the way that he talks about hemp and just sort of opens it up and go, it's absolutely insane that we're not taking advantage of this material. It's insane that we're not doing that. And and that for me is, if that's not what your artwork's doing, then your artwork's not really worth making anyway. So
that's the thing with the IPCC report and the Limits to Growth report. They're all coming together at 2030. Then that's the ultimate tipping point. So if anything's going to save jobs, save industry, save the planet, it's moving to crops like hemp to remove things like forestry, all these demands upon.
These things are unsustainable.
Wonderful. Before we get further down the rabbit hole that is hemp, which is very exciting, I feel like we need to introduce another very important KSCA project, which is an artist, a farmer, and a scientist walking to the bar. And so Laura, being the founder of that project, I just thought perhaps Ian might have a microphone, I think, that can pass to you. You could perhaps tell us a little bit about that and the many projects that are taking off as a consequence of it.
Thanks, Eloise. Well, yeah, I'm not the founder, but I'm coordinator.
It's
all in KSCA. It's a very democratic.
Absolutely.
Blah blah blah. But I have to do a shitload of work.
Thanks, Evan.
I would say actually that the concept for the project grew very much out of the Hemp Initiative, because I think it was by engaging with someone like Stuart and actually seeing a farmer, a progressive farmer who thinks completely differently about how to get the best out of land in a way that regenerates the land, led us on a journey to meet a whole lot of other farmers. And we went up to Bingara and other parts of New South Wales and met farmers who were fighting climate change on the ground in the way that they run their businesses. And I think that was really striking. I'm a city slicker, like most people, and I think I was just so shocked to see that there were these farmers advocating for climate change, not getting any voice in the city, and that they actually had the kind of knowledge of land and the kind of knowledge of the science behind actual sort of the issues that we're all politically engaged with, but not necessarily instrumentally engaged with, and their livelihoods are connected to it. So that was partly the inspiration behind the project. And we brought it together with a whole group of artists in mind. We were dealing with these materials, so like hemp, the other materials we're working with in carbon, so Georgina's project is focused on biochar, which is you'll hear about that later, so I won't preempt. Lucas's project is about carbon sequestration and how farmers can economically benefit from sequestering carbon in their soils. Jono and I are working on humus, which is this sort of mysterious substance that is the living part of soil that needs to be kind of regenerated and is depleted everywhere, and we're trying to kind of understand it. So there are 8 projects, and where the idea was that because there's such divisions, I guess, between the fields of environmental science and farming, we discovered, we thought, let's get artists in amongst it and create some partnerships and just give ourselves time to actually learn from each other and have some conversations that don't normally happen. And so the project is based a lot around kind of shared residencies and giving people time to actually talk about the issues rather than be stuck in all our sort of polarised camps and feel like we're battling each other, rather than just getting to understand land in a collaborative way.
Yeah, wonderful. So exciting. Now, Alex, can you tell us what is Cementa Contemporary Arts Festival and how does it fit into all of this?
So yeah, I've been thinking about this question because I did get to see it before the hang, and I think my answer is that cement is a gateway drug. we're basically, it's a contemporary art festival, and for me it's many things. It's my turn on the microphone. I know you love to talk, but yeah. No, next. You're next. Yes, so it's a contemporary art festival. It basically in the town of Kandos, which is about, an hour and a half from here? So it's 3.5 from the city. Kandos, for those who don't know, it was originally a cement town. Its sort of byline is, the town that built Sydney, or the town that built the harbour bridge, because all the cement that's in the harbour bridge came from Kandos. So it is, it's the home of Kandos Cement, and then after that, I think it was the Australia. It turned into Australia. Anyways, one of the big cement companies, and the cement works had closed down in 2012 when my partner and I had gone on residency there at Anne Finnegan, who's an arts writer and an academic. She had a place there, and we went and spent a month up there making art, and we got drunk with her one night and thought, started to talk about this, what it was going to mean for the town that its main industry had died. And then somebody said, oh yeah, but wouldn't it be good to make an art festival in that? This is, which is exactly what artists do. They just think about themselves. And so this festival started out of this, out of this situation. And then very quickly kind of came, it basically came home what we were doing, which was to throw a party in a town that was, economically under a lot of stress. It was not it's not a party venue, basically. And so we started to work to think about how we would make this festival something that would include the town, that would speak to the town, and that would benefit the town. And that's kind of underpinned now the premise of the festival itself. And it's a pretty good premise for making art, because one of the things I say is that the art. So one of the things we've asked the artists to do in order to achieve that is to actually visit the town prior to the festival and then make artwork that addresses issues of concern to their town. It's created a situation which the town has become to a certain degree, because I'm not going to over-congratulate. These are things that we can speak very sort of, optimistically about, and it is an optimistic thing. It is definitely, but it's also fraught and it's also ongoing. It's a relationship, like any relationship. It just requires consistent work. You just have to keep working at it, and you can't sit there and go, oh yeah, we did it now, and now it's done, and we're good now. That's not gonna happen, hopefully. And so we basically made this festival that was around, engaging this town with the art world, and that's, I think, was actually very refreshing for a lot of the artists as well, to be able to allow to speak to an audience that was other than an arts audience. And to be able to address, artists, traditionally that's what we do, is we try to address issues of social concern, but actually to address them to the people that are undergoing them was, I think, is an exciting part of what we do. KSCA comes out of that as a way of actually extending it into, part of it, for me, part of the attraction when the idea sort of first started to bubble up, out of all of these accidents, these sort of coincidences that occurred, which is Ian's poster and Gilbert's response to that poster, and then everyone else in the group kind of responding when we put it out there. Basically all of that stuff started to come together. One of the things I really liked about it was, because I'd come from the city as an artist making work in the city, and I was suddenly in the country, and I was like, how do you make art out here? This is crazy. There's no brick walls anywhere, and it's everything looks like it's been there. If you take a photo of it, it all looks like it's been there forever. It looks timeless. It doesn't look contemporary. And then, but it is. Like it's all, everybody in the country has to deal with the present like everybody in the city does. We're wrecking the environment. We're overheating the world, and they're actually in a position to do something about it. And as we got to talking to them, their thing was that, well, they're not part of the conversation. Nobody was involving them in the conversation. So I was like, well, we can do that. We can, because artists, if we can do one thing, we can talk about shit. So, that was kind of the way that, so for me, Cementa was this sort of little bridge in relationship to KSCA. It was this bridge that kind of brought this, this particular kind of culture out into the regions and gave us an opportunity to go, hold on, we can maybe take this stuff and put it somewhere where it hasn't yet been, and try to build, And so I guess that's the way I tell the story.
And the next Cementa, that's happening in November of this year, isn't it?
21 to 24th.
There you go, 21 to 24th. And from what I understand, the Artist Farmer Scientist project is going to culminate there.
That's right.
So there'll be a showcase of all the finished works and experiments, etc. At Cementa. So if anyone's interested in coming, you should come along. Yeah. So Imogen, I have a question for you. So Imogen, as both an artist and a scientist who is working with farmers, what do you think art can bring to the regenerative farming movement? And that's a big one.
No, it's a really good question. So I come from an arts background and also a storytelling background through radio and documentaries. As an artist, I don't really identify as an artist, but I am more and more hanging around with this lot because the idea it's a very interdisciplinary space, and so one day you've got a hat on, and one day you're a facilitator, one day you're a curator, one day you're a producer, one day you're coming up with an idea. So it's a nice kind of divergent sort of stream of consciousness, which I love. Yeah. So coming into science as a recent career change for me, I've just finished a degree in ecology and soil science up in Armidale at University of New England, with an interest in regenerative ag. So for me now, I'm like, ooh, I'm kind of a scientist, but I'm also kind of an artist. So this project was great. I feel like in agriculture, we have to change the narrative. And the narrative is unfortunately, it's dominated by, in a really negative way, they now rule the world. They just bought Monsanto. And, so much of conventional ag is run by these multinational corporations and agrochemical industries. And so coming at agriculture from a more ecological context, using ecological processes to harness the power of nature to make your land more productive but also more resilient. That's kind of the genesis and the principles of regenerative ag. It's a great storytelling, for me, is a great way to change that narrative. So the more we can get stories of farmers to different audiences, like Alex is talking about, is powerful. And I think a really good example of that is Charlie Massey, who's a farmer from the Monero, has a book called The Call of the Reed Warbler. It's come out, it's been about a year out, I guess now. Charlie's going to be keynote speaker at our event in September up in Bingara. And he was a farmer of 20 years who inherited the merino sheep stud in his early 20s. He was studying zoology at ANU, got called back to the farm because of family problems. He took over the farm. He was the top merino breeder in Australia, doing the conventional way, and suddenly he went, my system is broken and the soil's unhealthy, the land is dead. And so he went on this amazing regenerative journey. He met farmers who have been, incorporating principles of holistic management and all these other natural sequence farming, all these methods of regenerating landscapes. And he then went back to ANU and did his PhD in human ecology, which is so fundamental because ecology is so important to understand how ecosystems work, but it's more important to understand how we interact with them and to understand how we can either nurture them forward and kind of nudge them in a good direction, or we can degrade them. And so Charlie did his PhD in this, and the product of his PhD was this book, and the reason why it's so powerful is because it's a story book. It's a story of farmers, and it's their narratives, and it's scientific, but it's actually about storytelling. So I feel like that's really where the power will lie in changing the narrative, and that's why I'm so excited to be part of this project.
Oh, it's so wonderful that you're at the nexus of it all.
Yes.
And on the flip side, Laura and Jono, and Georgie as well, what are your experiences as artists working with scientists? So being just from an arts background, I suppose, in your instance, do you feel that working with scientists has changed how you make art at all? Any of you can respond.
It's been super fascinating. It's incredibly interesting, and I think it's incredibly important. I think Laura and I were talking about it. The main difference for me is the work becomes much more of like a communicative approach. Like Laura and I often talk about this idea of what if art could also just be this beautiful scientific model and this sort of platform for understanding these concepts. Like humus, obviously everyone in this room has an understanding of humus, but many people don't. And I think coming from the city, we've had this amazing opportunity to work with Glenn, who's a scientist, but among other things, he's an incredible organic farmer. He's got a very holistic sort of knowledge of the land and the landscape. And if we can sort of take those concepts and begin to unpack them in sort of the same way that a scientist would go about their work. So I guess in that sense, the art sort of becomes a bit of an experiment. Yeah.
I feel like I have a slightly different response to it in the sense that I feel like, how scientists sort of tend to specialise in their little fields, and I think that artists tend to specialise in their little, like you find a territory and a little nook, and that you, that's what I was doing, and then I decided, but getting involved with this and being given biochar was just an amazing thing. But I think that artist voices are still really valuable within scientific context, and it's not something that we're just like necessarily just sending out that information, but actually taking that information in, which is also really valuable. And I think it's really interesting that, because I went to a biochar conference, I was invited to do that on top of the project, and I sat in this room full of scientists and bureaucrats and business people who were, and looking at this biochar as a resource, but also incredibly concerned with climate change. And I just wish that so many other people could actually get involved in that it wasn't just a conversation where it's just a conference of scientists, that it's not just important for, I feel, I don't know to what extent this is true, that scientists aren't just talking to each other, but that other people are involved in that conversation. And even though it might be the tiniest little bit of participation in that conversation, that it's all important for everybody to be involved. I mean, a lot of people, we spend a lot of time protesting and doing stuff that feels really futile. And then there are people who are working on things that are really amazing, and they're actually doing the work, and you want to be witness to that. But also, there are things that people are doing in terms of climate change and research that could be quite disastrous. and science is just as willing to go down that path as it is willing to go down any other path. It doesn't have to be necessarily a good path. And so we all have to actually be there and be involved. That's how I feel about it. And so as an artist, so in terms of the language that I was using, I was speaking to people. I was really speaking to peers, and when I was painting, and now I feel like I'm speaking to artists, and then everybody to scientists, and everybody else gets to be witness to that, but not directly to an audience, not transferring that information across. That's how I feel about it.
Did you have anything to add?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, no, that's really, because we've also had conversations within KSCA about that
challenge that scientists are seeking the assistance of artists to communicate what they want to share with the world, and they know they're not getting the argument across, and so that is a challenge. But at the same time, that there is more to what artists can offer, as you're saying, and I think that's really, it's fascinating. I think for us, I like what you say actually, that it's an experiment, because I've been thinking a lot about that the farmer and the scientist and the artist are all creative in their own way, and they're all divergent thinkers, or they can be. You know, we've got this reputation, or everyone has their reputation that can be about focus and being narrow and kind of blinkered or parochial because we're so focused. But I think there's actually a fellowship between the practices of artists, farmers, or progressive farmers and scientists, and the way farmers, for example, who are trying to regenerate their land, they have to interpret the signs that the land's communicating and kind of experiment and track change. And so I think that's one of the things I found so stimulating as an artist working with both farmers and scientists, just the sense of experimentation that we can, that are sort of kind of cutting across each other. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I comment on that? Because, I mean, I, in a sense, started, you know, a few decades before everybody else on all this, and did my first things, or first attempt at things around this way back in the 1970s. And what was driving me was a real question about, well, what is an artist and who do you call an artist, right? And so for me, over time, I've just turned the whole definition on its head. And like obviously we don't all agree or feel exactly the same about this, but for me, I just think, yeah, there is an art world and there's an art industry and there's people who call themselves artists. They're actually sort of, you know, of comparatively little relevance, right? The real issue is who are the people who go out there and create cultural change and make us understand the world differently and make us then, you know, create all that other change that follows from that, the social change, the political, legislative change, whatever. But it all starts with thinking about the world differently. And there is no longer, once upon a time when you would have thought about art as being making paintings and stuff like that, there is no limit to what tools you can use as an artist or what media or whatever, right? So in this situation, it becomes a case of who are the people who are creating cultural change? They're the people you should call artists. And they could just as easily be scientists or farmers. Probably the critical bit in it is, do they communicate it? You know, do they actually put this out into the world rather than just sitting locked away somewhere? And other people who have started out in the art world come with various forms of really quite sophisticated communication skills, not the conventional communication skills, but other more ambiguous and more ambitious types of communication skills. And so you have this whole confluence of people coming together like this, right, is a constant changing interplay like that. But it all of it has built into it the idea that, look, anyone can be an artist as long as they're actually starting to think about the world differently and putting it out there, which is exactly what the US right wing understood and how idiots like Trump got up. One of their standard things was, you know, that culture was upstream of politics, right? And that's exactly what we say too, you know, that you change the culture, you change the way everything else in the world works, right? And that's why also what's going on here when we talk about this all the time is we're talking about Cementa, is we're talking about audiences. We're going away from the art world audience and confronting these other audiences which aren't used to dealing with the art world. They're not the art world audience. They're an audience of just average people out there. And we confront them, but they confront us, you know, with having to actually rethink how we present stuff and how we behave.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing has become an interaction between us and our various audiences and our various collaborators, and the respect we have for them. We realise that some of them are a lot better than us. You know, whatever inflated ideas we might have of ourselves.
Absolutely. So just generally to all our panellists, what would you like residents of the Blue Mountains and beyond to take away from KSCA's work and and the role that that changing relationships with the land and art play together? What should residents take away from your work and from the work in this exhibition?
I feel, well, I could say something. I don't know if it's very important, but
we'll be the judge of that.
One thing I like. One thing I like about working with the KSCA crew is that everyone's very process focused, and exactly what Ian was talking about. I'm living in a rural community up in Armidale, working in sort of science and agriculture, you know, but then people mention, oh, you're an artist, and they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I don't paint or sculpt or anything like that, and I sort of have to say to them, well, I'm kind of like a conceptual artist, and I kind of often collaborate with people who aren't artists and tell their stories, and so, you have to break that down a lot, but often what's most important, I think, as an artist is process, and it's actually the journey that you go on that is the most important thing, not necessarily the outcome. And often with my work, the outcome is more of a reflective work, or like a documentation of what journey I've gone on. And so the KSCA sort of philosophy is very much about process, and it's very much about go on your journey, talk to people you want to talk about, learn, communicate. And then whatever we come up with at the end is kind of almost just like, it's still important, but it's about, bringing the audience on that journey more so than having some picture perfect sculpture that, like it's that kind of thing, which I love about working with these people. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess just to follow on, because I think the Imogen answered that question in a very oblique way, which is when you ask us, well, what can you all take away from regenerative farming? And it's like, well, we're not regenerative farmers, we're all artists. But one of the things that I think that and this is really Lucas who sort of pioneered this as an art form, I think, I've learned from him this, is that what you bring to a work is your ignorance. It's the best thing you can bring to it. And it's one of the things that artists treasure, is our not knowing, is to be able to do something without knowing what it is what we're doing. And as scientists, actually, if you think about it, that's their process as well. They're engaged with what they don't know. And so the stories that you end up telling out of this are usually your own stories of discovery. And they're very personal, they're very subjective. They're not scientific stories in the same way that we would normally. But they have a lot of authority if they're told properly, if they're told by somebody who can be considered an author, and that can bring a lot of other people into to attributing value, and so I think that for me has been one of the really brilliant realizations, that I can just go in here as somebody who has a know nothing, and that's my specialty here. That's the thing that makes me, that gives me an opportunity to actually kind of contribute to it, and to be able to tell those stories the same.
Wonderful.
Did you want to have a?
Yeah. Well, okay. And then after you, Lee.
For me, it's play. Play is everything. I went through many years of academic training to teach me how to paint, but it didn't teach me how to play. What I've learned from KSCA and through interactions with these people is how to play. I mean, there's authors such as Johannes Lazinger who go into depth about play, and now there's a whole body of work about play work, because we've lost the ability to play, or we don't recognise play as being important. But play is the basis of culture. Everything is based on play. We learn from play, we interact through play, we develop our skills through play, and once we become adults, we're not allowed to play anymore. So what we do here is play.
It's the school.
That's very true.
School that play.
Is this one going to switch?
Oh, I'll take this one. I'm just going to answer this question very directly and say that we would love you to come and see more of what KSCA is doing. And can I just plug a couple of things? So here I've got just a bit of information about a picnic that is taking place at the farm of Erica Watson and Hayden Druce, who are actually suppliers of Lyttleton Stores. So they've got a farm down in Hartley, which is the site of one of this Artist Farmer Scientist projects about solar energy, and a fantastic interaction going on around both photosynthetic solar energy and photovoltaic solar energy, around using solar panels in the context of the farm. So we'll have a farm tour on April 28th with the artists and members of KSCA, and we'd really love for people to come along, and that's the 28th of April. And then, as Imogen mentioned, we have an event in September in Bingara, which is where one of our main partners, it's called the Living Classroom, which is a really interesting site. They've turned a town commons into a public farm for education and around generative agriculture and world agriculture to do with sustainability. So if you go to our website, just keep an eye on our website. That's going to be a really fun event in September, and then Cementa in November. So there's a few little milestones that the coordinator in me is like, what are we doing?
And there's another one even sooner that, which is one of our rare interactions with the real art world, which is the upcoming next Caldor project is with a New York artist called Asad Raza at Carriageworks, and we're doing a collaborative thing with him on the very last day of his work, which is the 18th of
That's right.
May.
18th of May.
Fantastic. And so are Erica and Hayden as well.
And actually, and Gilbert's...
And Gilbert is running a workshop, which I might as well spruik right now rather than at the end, which is going to be next week on the 13th, I believe, Saturday the 13th. So if you're interested, you can book online through our website, lyttletonstores.com.au. You just go to the workshops and events page and it'll be there. It's teaching you how to make your own hemp paper. I feel like perhaps you can talk about it more than I can. But that's a little summary. So if you'd like to find out more about the processes of making your own paper, please do attend. It's a half-day workshop. So to wrap up, I guess I'd like to throw this out to the audience now. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask our panelists, I'd be curious to know if anyone has any suggestions as to what they think, or as to what they'd like to see KSCA do, as to what kinds of cultural change they'd like to see addressed or affected. Does anyone have any questions? Luke, we'll go with you first.
I just wanted the whole group, if they could, respond to the idea of, there's been a lot of talk about sort of very positive narratives, but I found Imogen's little offhanded statement about Bayer taking over Monsanto a really alarming piece of information that's not necessarily commonly known in the mainstream media. It's not being covered. And I just wondered whether there was a philosophy within KSC to, or whether you've discussed this idea of the idea of the positive narrative as opposed to the alarmist narrative. And I just wanted to, if you could respond to the idea of the mediated message that you're making work, do you mediate that work to consider an audience, as Ian said earlier, that has not necessarily got any sort of an art experience or has a limited or kind of a particularly preconceived idea about what art is, whether you mediate the work to that audience or do you then mediate the interpretation of that through other things? Do you have interpreters or that?
It's a really good question. It's a really, and it's one that I think that we've had lots of conversations. There's no resolution to it whatsoever. I think there is definitely within our group a realization, and this was, I think, Laura gave me this term, which I now bandy about at every opening I go to, which is the power of the positive affect, which is one of the things that I attribute to Cementa. And one of the things that when we are trying to, we're doing this, right, just shut up, take it. So one of the things that I think we think about, especially when we think about social changes, we think about the critical as being the impetus by which we change our society, and that's been but it's also become something that's become, and I think social media has actually taken it to its extreme, to where it's actually kind of collapsed in on itself to some degree, and that being able to, one of the things that I find, and just within our practice, it's not really within our philosophy, is there's a certain locatedness about what we do, like that we just, it's not something that we're trying to create large scale, universal sort of narratives that will transmit everywhere in disembodied form. We're actually engaging with actual communities and trying to do things in a more of a grassroots sort of style and trying to find that sort of social body again, rather than to go. So, and the positive affect is really, it's significant within those, and you know, like Cementa is a good example of that. I mean, one of the like I'm reticent about taking about taking too much credit or trying to be too optimistic about what we've done with that festival. But I know when we went into that town, they had no idea why anybody would find that town fascinating or interesting, much less artists. And then 6 years later, they all understand their town is really beautiful. It was a working class town. It was covered in dust. Every kid that went through it called it a hole. Kandos was a hole, right? That came out of the first festival. And now the dust is cleared and everybody's kind of gone, oh wait, no, this is actually really beautiful here. And being able to tell those positive stories and being able to, but not even that directly, like just having fun. Just sitting there and just like having, feeling joy for the world. How important that is to be able to actually to affect change, to be able to actually to do the harder, more difficult things. That's a really, really important thing, and I think that's kind of seeped into a lot of what we do.
Can I say something else about it? My history ever since the 70s has been that I decided that the way to deal with different audiences, I wanted to work with audiences away from the art world. Right? The way to deal with those audiences was not to do a, hey, I'm an artist and I've arrived to help you, sort of thing, and just get laughed at, It was to, in fact, embed myself in those things and use their media and use their understanding. And so when I went to work for trade unions, I didn't sort of do artworks about unionism. I basically went and ran trade union journals and trade union political campaigns, and some of which was, long, tedious, boring, very unromantic work, and that I've done that in a number of different areas and a number of different groups. When I went to Lithgow, I didn't go around Lithgow doing artworks about Lithgow. I basically went and got on council committees, and did that sort of slog, and then did things along the way. I used those skills that I had as an artist to make that work and to negotiate with people and to present things to them. Right? But the idea was to reduce practical outcomes of some sort using those skills. And it's not as if KSCA is actually any different to that. What I'm doing in KSCA is using, because it's more an art world group of people, I would make things that look like artworks. I would make things, there are times when you want the art world to be your audience, so you use the art world's language. And I've gone and done paintings again, from time to time, with that work for that particular context. So each time, what you do is you find the language for that particular audience that suits that audience, and you tailor the thing towards that. Now that's only a thing about approach. That doesn't answer your other question about the negativity of the world and the problem about that. I mean, I think I feel so much of my life I spend dealing with the negativity of the world that it's actually nice when involved in KSCA to do things which aren't about it. Like, as some of you would know, I sit there most of the day putting really nasty stories up on Facebook about how bad the world is. So I think I'm bathed in negativity the whole time, and also, doing everything I can to actually help other campaigns, which are protest campaigns and things like that. But KSCA has each thing. You can't do everything with one activity. And so for particular activities, you choose one thing. And you should have many ideas. You shouldn't just be pursuing one thing. You pursue different things in different ways, and you have different approaches to them. And be aware you're dealing with different audiences, so we're going to respond in different ways.
I guess just to quickly reply, I think one of the hard things is actually finding those stories as well, because what I'm experiencing is that I'm wanting to document stories of farmers changing, and my ideal was to find a farmer who's conventional, who's trying to shift his practice to something more regenerative. But the problem is that the only people who want to talk as farmers are farmers who have done it, because they're really confident to be able to talk about it, because it's often reflective of real life. The people who have the sadder stories are less likely to talk about them because they don't feel confident enough to sort of defend themselves against the naysayers, and I don't know. So that, I think often part of the challenge of doing this will be to find those stories. And I mean, it could take years, but eventually, I'd like to tell that story of a farmer who is, who maybe has had illness in the family from too much chemical use, or who is, you know, watching his landscape die, and you know, but those stories are mainly at the moment all reflective, and it's farmers telling me what happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago when, you know, so it's different kinds of people as well. You know. Anyway.
No, fascinating. I think we have time for just one more question, unfortunately, and there was one at the back from you.
Sorry.
From what I saw.
Well, one's a question, one's a comment, just in terms of hemp as
So there's only one plant, there's just different strands. All of the products that come out of hemp, I mean, there's anywhere between 15,000 and 25,000 industrial uses for hemp. Everything down to highly efficient nanotubes can be outdone by hemp for batteries. It's just, the research is happening. The architects know what hempcrete is. People are developing hemp products, food products, all the rest of it, hemp fuel, everything. You go online and there's just so much happening about hemp at the moment. People are trying to attract investment, so there's all of these greedy multinational corporates trying to get money for hemp products, and it's happening. Okay, Sydney University has received upwards of $43 million from one donor to research medical hemp. That same donor put about $10 to $12 million into American research for hemp. So, I mean, it's not lacking in research. The big stumbling block will always be community resolve and that demonisation, getting over the demonisation process.
Did you? No. Fascinating. Were there any other very quick questions from the audience before we wrap up? No? Wonderful. Well, thank you so very much, panellists, for speaking tonight and for exhibiting in our wee little gallery at Lyttleton Stores.